the smartphone, maximizing the basics. My name is Colette Phipps, and I am Executive Director of the Westchester Livable Communities Initiative. And on behalf of May Carpenter, Commissioner of the Department of Senior Programs and Services, and George Latimer, the County Executive, we thank you for your interest, and we sincerely hope that the information you receive today will be informative, and most of all, that it'll be helpful. Today's agenda is simple. I will be introducing you to our moderator, who will then introduce you to our presenter. We will leave room for questions. I'm gonna ask most people to please, in terms of background noise, please mute yourselves. Please mute yourselves. Okay. Now I would like to introduce, I'm sorry, I'm still hearing a lot of people. Please mute yourselves. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for today's meeting, Dr. Pramod Gaur. Dr. Gaur is an adjunct professor at Pace University, and he is co-chair of the Technology Collaborative of the Westchester County Livable Communities Program. He was inducted into the 2013 ATA class of fellows, and he is considered telehealth subject matter expert. His activities in the past 20 years as a digital health industry advocate includes demonstrations to the United States Presidential Advisor, the US Congress, the White House Conference on Aging, and international delegates at the United Nations. Dr. Gaur received his doctoral degree from the University of Kansas and received his postdoctoral training at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and the University of Maryland in Baltimore. So now let's hear from Dr. Pramod Gaur.
Thank you very much, Colette. I really appreciate it, and welcome to everyone. This is a effort from Technology Collaborative to share with you some of the basic principle of using smartphone and technology these days is very helpful. Many of us know, but to having this information will be useful. This information is being recorded, and God willing, it will be made available to you on demand as it becomes necessary. So today's speaker is Andrew Cawford. Andrew is the Community Service Aide at the Westchester County Department of Senior Programs and Services. He also worked as a network infrastructure engineer, specializing in ServiceNow administration for Cisco voice over IP telephony system, as well as database management and website design for several companies. He also helped to ensure smartphone security compliance with the IT team member in the workplace, as well as work with third-party vendor to ensure smooth installation and functionality of a specialized application for infrastructure management and monitoring. So with any further ado, Andrew, I'm going to pass it over to you and you can take from there.
All right, thank you very much, Pramod. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. And today I'm really just going to be going over just some basic things that I think, can help anyone who's already a smartphone user, who's interested in becoming a smartphone user. So let me just get my screen share up here. So yes, as Colette mentioned, this is understanding the essentials of your smartphone, maximizing the basics. And to start off with, I'm just going to go into, what are a few important things to consider when you're using your phone, because everyone's, usage is going to be different. It's going to vary somewhat from one person to another. So first and foremost, just consider what your personal needs are. Do you want to just stay in contact with people by phone and text? Do you want to use social media, Facebook, to stay in contact with friends and relatives or whatever it is? Just have those things at the forefront of your mind when you're deciding, what things you want to learn, and also if you're still deciding which type of phone you want to get. Some of the newer technologies that they have on these phones now, it can include, voice, face, and fingerprint recognition, which at first can seem a bit scary, but for a lot of people, once they get used to them, they find that it's a little bit easier to use. So it's just something to know about, and whether or not you want to do that, because it's generally optional with these things. One thing that I think is great about what a lot of new phones have to offer is options for health tracking. If you're trying to stick to a diet, if you're calorie counting, you can have an app that'll just, calculate those things for you, make it easy to keep track of. You can check, your blood pressure, you can put your weight in there, your oxygen levels. I mean, almost everything you could think of, there's probably an app out there for you that will help. So I think that that's, again, something that people of any age should really be considering. But it's something to really look into, because it's not something that gets talked about as much as some of the other fancier features of a lot of smartphones. And lastly, on this slide, just data consumption. It's something that for a lot of people, they don't think about, they don't know about. And if you're on Wi-Fi, it's not an issue. But if you are out and about, which admittedly these days not a lot of us are, but when things resume, when normality resumes, data consumption is something to keep in mind about. If you're not at home, if you're not on Wi-Fi, you want to think really about how much data you want to consume on your mobile plan. So that's something I'll touch upon a little bit later. And just, I always like to go into this because there's a lot of people who don't really know the differences between smartphones and what we had before that in the prior generation, which was flip phones. So the most important thing about a smartphone that everyone immediately notices is that it's a touchscreen, which, again, if you're used to having buttons on cordless phones and flip phones and things like that, it can seem intimidating at first, but for most people, they should be able to adjust to it with enough practice. So that's something that's unique to smartphones. Internet access is, again, it's a major selling point for smartphones. That's the biggest reason why people switched over to them, was because of them basically being like a miniature computer you can keep in your pocket or purse. Access to apps, being able to get to your email, to your social media, navigation. We don't really need standalone GPSs anymore, because all smartphones can basically function as that. Texting is, of course, different because, again, as I mentioned, it's a touch screen. So, learning to use a touchscreen keyboard can be a little bit more challenging than what we used to have with the dial pads. The virtual assistants that they now have, whether it's Siri or Bixby or Google Assistant or any of these, they can operate under voice recognition controls. Alexa with Amazon is another very popular one that a lot of people have. So, your phone will come with its own. So it's something that's good to use. If you like if you like to control things with your voice, it's makes you feel like you're living in the future. And finally, games. And games, can mean a wide variety of things. It's not just, video games, but it can be, it can be brain games, these kind of things that just, it could be crossword puzzles. There can be all kinds of things that can be pretty beneficial to your mental health and to being able to keep yourself sharp, throughout the day. It can be a good distraction, it can be a good stress relief. But I think that looking into games can be an important thing for anyone who's using a smartphone. So to start off here, this is an example of one of the most popular smartphones on the market. This is probably the leading Android phone at the moment. This is the Samsung Galaxy. The latest one is the S20 5G. You may hear a lot about 5G in the news these days and in conspiracy theories and all that. And, it's really nothing to be concerned with. It just means faster speeds, but that's going to show up in the names of a lot of these phones. So, that's just a, just a visual example of what the Android phone looks like. And then here is the latest iPhone, the iPhone 11, which, again, at a glance in these pictures, it doesn't look tremendously different from the last one. But when you use them, you find that each one's operating system does function in a fairly different way. A lot of people think that Apple has a more intuitive system for people who have never used a smartphone. But I've known plenty of other people who think Android is the more intuitive. So I think it just depends on which one you get exposed to first. But generally, people stick to one or the other once they get comfortable with it. So I'll start off just talking a little bit more about Android phones. And so one thing to know is that it's similar to the difference between like a PC and a Mac computer. Android is more similar to a PC in that respect. So it runs on the Android operating system. It has the Google Play Store. So Android is essentially run and owned by Google. So it's whenever you're downloading an app, you're going to go through their, what they call the Play Store. And I'll get into the different stores for apps and how to do that in just a few minutes. The Samsung phones will come with what's called Bixby, who's the virtual assistant, but there's also Google Assistant, which will be available on any Google phone. You can set up things like Google Pay if again, when we're all back to going to stores regularly and everything, you can just use your smartphone to check out rather than needing to get your cards out, if that's something that you would like to do. A lot of people still prefer to use the credit cards the way they always have. And of course, some of these features in here are things you can get on any smartphone. You can get the news, your email. You can set up alarm clocks, to wake you up or alert you to things throughout the day. Obviously, you have full access to social media platforms. One important thing that I think, especially as many of us still continue to remain in lockdown until things really get the all clear, is getting food delivery set up. You can get both groceries and things from restaurants, and there's a variety of apps that are available on both Android and iPhone. But it's something that I've used myself a lot over the last few months, and it's helped me avoid having to take any what might seem like needless risks to go out and risk exposure to the virus. So yeah, you can use Grubhub, Uber Eats, a variety of supermarket delivery services. Pretty much every supermarket has their own app that you can use to order things. So if you have a favorite local supermarket, you can find out what their app is, and in all likelihood, you should be able to get it delivered right to your door. Obviously, the phone comes with a camera, as all phones do these days. One thing I put in here is S Health. So I touched briefly before upon some of the health tracking things that these phones come with. S Health comes on Samsung phones on the Galaxy line, and it's a particularly good, it's a pretty robust program, and it really allows you to track almost anything you would need about your health, between exercise, diet, and just general health barometers. And if you happen to have a Samsung phone, or if you're interested in getting one, I would highly recommend utilizing that app. It is free with any Samsung phone, so that's something to just be aware of. And then finally, I just have settings and personalization, which is something that I'll get a little more into in several minutes. But if you can see that the gear symbol in the middle of this picture here, that black gear, that is a symbol that indicates the settings. So whether you're using an app or just looking for the settings in the phone, that gear icon on an Android is the symbol to look out for. That's the one where if you're just saying, God, I wish I knew how to alter some of the settings on this. I wish I knew how to make the text bigger or make the background darker or whatever it might be. Look for that little gear. That will be the symbol that tells you this is where I can go to personalize things and change things to be more comfortable for me. So now I'll just go a little bit into Apple. So much like in the same way that Android could be compared to a PC, Apple works the same way as a Mac. And that's one of the things that Apple really prides themselves on, is being able to have kind of a seamless transition from any of their products to another. So for example, if you already use a MacBook laptop, it runs pretty much in the same way that an iPhone does, and pretty much any of their products. They have a very good ability to interface with one another. So if you already have Apple products, an iPhone is probably a good way to go. just for the increased compatibility and usage between devices. So like many Apple products, it runs on the iOS operating system. The virtual assistant, one of the more famous ones that comes with the iPhone, is Siri. And Siri is probably a little bit more advanced than some of the others. She seems to have a little bit more functionality, at least in my experience, than the Google ones do. But for the most part, they can all do a lot of the basics pretty well. So that's really more of a concern if you're getting into, I guess, advanced use. But it's just something to be aware of. So the App Store for Apple, it's pretty similar to the Google Play Store. The main difference, and it's an important thing, is that the Apple App Store is much more curated than the Google one is. The Google one is kind of a more open marketplace. It allows people to put up their own apps with a little bit less regulation, a little bit less oversight. Apple is a little bit stricter about who they'll allow to put apps up on their store and when. So as we get in a few slides, I'll get into some of the security concerns when downloading apps. That's one area where Apple is a little bit stronger. And in general, they have tougher security on their devices than some of the Android ones do. The Android ones have the same capacity to be as secure as Apple phones are, but the main difference really is that Apple requires it. Apple does not give you the freedom to operate with, less security if you wanted to, whereas Android does. So if you're someone who doesn't really take your phone out of the house and doesn't have a huge need for a lot of security, then an Android might be a little bit more of a comfortable experience because, for example, with Apple, anytime you download a new app, it's going to require you to put in your password. And for some people, that can be kind of a cumbersome feature. It is more secure, but it's just something to know in terms of comparisons between the two kind of leading smartphone operating systems. Apple's are kind of, their iPhones are kind of famous for their cameras. There's even been films made by directors such as like Steven Soderbergh, who filmed he's filmed, I think, 2 entire movies on his iPhone just to prove that he could, and he's released them. So the cameras on the iPhones are very good. And so if you're into photography at all, you're probably going to want to go with an iPhone. They have just the best software and slightly better hardware than you get from the Samsungs and some of the other phones. I mentioned Google Pay before. Apple has their own version, Apple Pay. Works the same way. If you like to hook up your cards to your phone and then just use your phone to pay at checkout, it's very easy to do. Another thing that I put in as a note in here is if you have any sort of professional or hobbyist use for your smartphone, iPhone is probably going to be a little bit better. And this is mainly a software consideration, that Apple produces some of the best in-house software when it comes to visual, audio, and things like that. So, if you're a musician or if you're an artist or, like I said before, a photographer, iPhone is really going to be a better choice for you in a lot of respects. The settings and personalization, I mentioned the click wheel for the Android. As you can see in these pictures here, it's the same idea. It's a gear wheel. It's just a slightly different looking gear. So if you need to get to the settings and personalization on your iPhone, you're going to want to look for that gear symbol. And as on the other one, you can access news, email, alarms, social media, and the same food delivery apps on an iPhone as you can on an Android. So some general usage and some safety and also how to install apps. So one of the first things that a lot of people will recommend, and I will as well, is it's good to have strong passwords. And for me, I find that getting a strong password doesn't have to be an overly complicated process, because sometimes when you're trying to meet all the requirements you see, they need special characters and numbers and all that, you're going to forget whatever this password is, especially when every website expects you to know what these things are. So for some people, they like to use something called a password manager, which is where you really only need to know the password to that one specific app or however it's used, and then it will manage all of your passwords for you. If you don't like to do that, if you like to still have control over each and every one of your passwords, my recommendation is to, in terms of coming up with things that are easy to remember but very hard to have hacked, because one of the important things to know about how passwords get stolen is that it's generally done like the majority of the time through what's called a brute force attack, which is basically where they just guess your password. They just keep trying different combinations until they get it. And a lot of the time they get them because a lot of us are inclined to use passwords that we'll remember. So we use birthdays, you know, or children's birthdays, or other things that wouldn't be too hard for someone to figure out if they spent the time to do it. So what I recommend has always been to come up with something like, you know, an inside joke or a reference that only you would know. Kind of like if you've ever seen a movie with time travel or something like that, and a person has to, you know, prove who they are, and someone says, tell me, you know, something that only you would know, that no one else would know. Those kind of things make very good passwords, especially if it's a phrase or a sentence, because they're easy to remember and the chances of anyone guessing them are very, very low. So it's just good advice to know about creating strong passwords. When you're connecting to Wi-Fi, which again, I'll touch upon a little bit more in a moment, but there is a difference between if you're doing it in public and in private. If you're in a private residence, if you're at home, if you're at someone else's home, it's okay to connect and do basically anything you would normally do on your phone, because it's what's called an encrypted connection. But when you're in public, your encryption is not protected in the same way. So it's important to know that if you're, say, at an airport and you want to connect to the Wi-Fi there because you don't have good, you know, service at the moment, that's fine. And if you want to go on social media, surf the web, all of that is totally fine. But one of the things that you'll want to avoid doing would be anything like online banking. That would be something to really avoid on a public Wi-Fi network. In terms of locking your device, it's an important thing. That's why I have this picture here of the key going into the smartphone screen. You have options between, you could go with a PIN number the same way you do on a debit card. You can use a screen pattern where essentially you're drawing a little pattern that you know on the screen, and that will unlock the phone for you. And then these days you can also go with a fingerprint. You could go with face recognition. You could go with a voice lock even on some of the newest devices. So you have all those options available to you. I've always been a fan of either doing the PIN or the pattern, but you know, everyone has their own preferences with this kind of thing. Theft is, of course, a general safety concern. A lot of people just get their phones stolen. So if you're someone like me who kind of keeps your phone on your person at all times in your pocket, then theft becomes more challenging. But if you're someone who tends to just leave your phone somewhere and then just use it whenever you feel like it, it's a good idea to keep it somewhere safe if there's any chance that someone could just snatch it, you know, because it's not fun to deal with that process. Accidental spending is becoming a bigger issue through what they call microtransactions. And this is particularly an issue with games, but there's other apps that do this as well. And where this becomes an issue is that both Android and iPhone, when you use the App Store, they're going to, at some point, ask for a credit card to be saved in case you purchase any apps. Now, I would have to double check this. I believe that Google may let you download free apps without putting in your credit card, but Apple will not. I'm pretty sure Apple will require the credit card to be associated with the account when you first set it up. Don't quote me on that, but that's just something to keep in mind. So the way that these things work is that when you're using the app, a lot of times there'll be these little pop-ups that'll say, you know, spend $1.99 for this thing or for that thing. And these little things add up. And sometimes it is easy, if you don't know exactly how to avoid them, to accidentally spend money on these things. And for some people, you know, particularly people with kids who may use the phone, those charges can rack up quite a bit, because if you have a child who doesn't have the strongest concept of money yet, you know, you could really run into a problem. Some parents have reported, you know, kids spending thousands of dollars in a single month on a game or an app, and the parents having no idea that they could even do that. And it's very hard to convince these companies, you know, that a child did it and that they should reverse the charges. So it's just something to be aware of when using apps and when downloading apps. And then avoiding scams. The scams are more prevalent now than they've ever been on the internet, and they come in a variety of ways. They come through apps. There are fake apps out there that are essentially spyware that want to steal your information or data. There are text messages that will tell you you've won a sweepstakes, or that you have an arrest warrant, or I mean, any variety of lies, of things that would just never come to you by a text message if they were real. And the email ones work in the same way. You know, they either tell you, they either try to scare you, or they try to make you think you've won something amazing. And just be very wary of those things, because the reality is that if you have an arrest warrant, or if you've won the lottery, no one is going to tell you that via text message, email, fraudulent app, or phone call. And of course, phone calls, all of us these days seem to get a tremendous amount of spam phone calls. And a lot of them, you know, come from within the US, a lot of them don't. A lot of them come from China, India, Russia, other parts of even Western Europe. I mean, really Africa, anywhere in the world these calls can come from, but they can show up with a local number. You know, they can spoof the caller ID is what they call it. And it'll show up with, you know, we're in Westchester. It'll show up as a 914 number. And you'll think, oh, this has got to be a real call. And then that's sometimes that's how the scam starts. So it's important to always think critically about any kind of thing that sets off any alarm bells, anything that even seems somewhat suspicious. Just assume it is, because it's easier to verify things when they're not when they're not a scam. So so that with this slide, I just want to talk a little bit of about Wi-Fi, and I just put a little note in there. It stands for wireless fidelity, which is something that it occurred to me earlier today when I was looking at this that I'd never actually heard anyone use that phrase. We all call it Wi-Fi, but if you ever wanted to know, that's what it stands for. So it's important when you use a smartphone to connect to Wi-Fi, because if you aren't connected to Wi-Fi, you're going to be consuming data. And data, depending on your cell phone plan, can impact you financially. So if you have an unlimited data plan, then you can disregard this, and you can, you know, you can just use that as to your heart's content. But most of us don't or don't want to pay for an unlimited plan. So we do need to know about those data caps, as they call them. So you see this little symbol up top in the white box, that is a Wi-Fi symbol. You'll see that symbol on your phone, and you can usually find it in the settings area, which I mentioned before with the gear wheels. And with that, you just go in there and you're going to put in, you know, the Wi-Fi information of your, whatever the local router is where you are, whether it's at home or somewhere else. And if you don't know what that is, you can usually ask someone and they'll be able to help you out with getting the correct Wi-Fi put in on your phone with the correct passwords and all that. But it is important to, whenever possible, try to stay connected to Wi-Fi, because nobody wants to pay extra money every month to surf the internet, you know, because they may have watched one too many videos or whatever it might happen to be. So it's important to know about that. Battery life is a major thing with phones these days, because you know, sometimes they seem to drain very fast, and it can be frustrating trying to keep them charged at all times. If you've ever seen either of these two symbols on the right side of the screen, you know, the top one is just, you know, a basic low battery. And if you're on an Apple product, you'll get that low battery message that pops up and warns you that you're going to run low on battery. So in terms of keeping it charged, obviously to charge it, you plug the phone into the cord that it came with. And it's generally better to use the ones that they came with. Sometimes we use third-party chargers, and those can be fine, but sometimes they can be prone to malfunction. And you're just better off, if at all possible, using the one that came with the phone. In terms of what drains the phone the most, the number one culprit is usually screen brightness. So screen brightness can be adjusted on any phone, and they usually will adjust themselves depending on the amount of ambient light that the front-facing camera is detecting. So if you're sitting out, like say in your backyard and it's a sunny day, your phone is going to have to go maximum brightness in order to have you be able to see anything. But you know, if you're inside, you don't necessarily need the brightness turned up all the way, you know. And if it's nighttime and if it's dark, you know, in the house, you certainly don't need a bright screen, because that can actually be pretty bad for your eyes. So it's important to know that a lower screen brightness wherever possible is going to help you out with your battery and also with your eyes. Also closing out running apps. So there's a lot of apps that sometimes they continue to run in the background, even if you're not using them. You're using something, then you left it and you went to a different app and you forgot about it, but that can still be eating up battery in the background. So it's important to know that certain kinds of apps that are continuing to run operations in the background should be closed out. And these days, a lot of the phones will alert you if an app is running in the background and taking up too much battery. So should you ever get an alert on your phone saying, hey, this app seems to be draining a lot of battery, just go ahead and let it close that app out. You probably don't need it running for all that long. Beyond that, there's a power saver mode in a lot of phones that will automatically turn on when the battery is low, but you can generally turn it on at any time if you just prefer to make your battery last as long as possible, and if you find that the power saver mode doesn't impact your day-to-day usage. It does limit certain things about the phone, so it's worth testing out and just seeing, is this actually going to improve your usage or not? After that, if you're still having battery issues and you're trying all these other things, you can always purchase an external battery, and that can just plug into your phone the same way the charger does and give you an extra, depending on which one you get, 4 to 8 hours of power, or some of them they'll just recharge your phone, say 2 to 4 times on a single battery charge. So those can be very useful. I have a couple of them myself because you never know when you're going to run low on battery and not have access to an electrical outlet. And then finally, here I put battery age. This is a major contributor to batteries draining very fast. As these lithium-based batteries get a little bit older, and I'm talking 1 or 2 years, not even all that old, they just don't charge the way that they used to. They don't last as long as they used to. So a major part of the reason that smartphones need to be, upgraded so frequently, which is frustrating because you feel like if you're spending this much money on a phone, you should be able to have it last 5, maybe even 10 years. But the batteries in these things only last maybe 1 or 2. And, and they don't give you the option usually, not anymore anyway, to change the battery itself without changing the entire phone. So that's just unfortunately the way the business practices have gone. So it's something that's important to know that once your phone hits, especially about the 2-year mark, there's a good chance that your battery will drain much faster than it did when you first bought it. For personalization, personalization is important because it's something that not a lot of us will look at when we get a new phone, but it can make a big difference in terms of how comfortable and easy the phone actually is to use. So, just to start with, you can increase the text size because a lot of us, we look at the phone and, the words on there are tiny. But there is a way, there's almost always a way in any app and even in just the phone settings itself, so it'll affect everything universally. Just go ahead and increase that text size so that everything is more easily read. Beyond that, you can zoom in on the screen. Sometimes you can do that, using your fingers and just using, what they call like the pinch and pull technique, or you can go again into the personalization and just permanently set a zoom to whatever level you like so that you can see everything very well. After that, in terms of personalization, some of the more fun things to do are, you can set up background pictures, of, your dog or a grandchild or, a landscape picture you really like, whatever it might be. But there's the options to do that. You can customize your ringtone. I feel like people don't do that quite as much as they used to. These days, people seem to stick with the default ones, but the option is always there. And finally, widgets are probably a little bit beyond maybe basic usage in terms of setting them up, but widgets are basically like little tools that will sit on the home screen or the other screens on the phone itself that will just give you the information you need without needing to go into the app. So a common one is the weather. You can just get a little weather report that will always show up on your home screen on your phone, and then you don't have to go looking for the weather app. You'll just know when I unlock my phone, I will see at the top of the screen the temperature and the likelihood of rain and things like that. And there are widgets for all varieties of apps. You can get widgets that will, be easy to start playing music on through an app like Spotify or Pandora. You can get widgets for a Google search bar, so you can just immediately search for things very easily. those are something else that are good to know, because while they're a little bit harder to maybe set up than just installing apps, they they do make things a little bit easier for future usage. So this is the Google Play Store app icon. So if you're using an Android phone, this is the icon you need to hit to get to the store in order to install the apps. And when you get into the App Store, it's going to look something like this. You're going to have a search bar at the top. You're going to have a list of apps in the center, depending on how you've filtered, your search, or however it is that it's displaying. For example, in this one, you can see where it says top paid is highlighted near the top there. That just means that I decided to filter the search results and just look at what were the top paid apps at this point in time. And I did this because I wanted to show you that if in the second arrow you see apps and ratings, and it's pointing because you can see here the name of the app, you can see the picture, you can see the star rating. So all of the star ratings are out of 5. Generally anything that's like 4 and above, or maybe even 3.5 and above, is pretty solid. You're not going to find a lot of apps with 5s. So, in terms of safety, when you're downloading an app, if you see something that has like a 1 or a 2, you're probably better off not trusting that app unless you happen to know it, like really know that it's okay and it just has bad ratings for whatever reason. You're going to be better off trying to stick to apps with higher ratings. And then at the bottom here, we just have some of the operation icons, which allows you to quickly switch between games, apps, movies, television, and books. And this is important for the Google Play Store because each one is almost treated like a separate marketplace of sorts. If you want games, you're going to want to hit that little games icon. If you want apps, hit the apps icon, and so on. And I'll get in this on the Apple side, but when you click on an app, an important thing to look out for is see how many downloads it has, see how many ratings it has. Because on the one hand, while an app may have a 4 or a 5, if only, say, 5 to 10 people have rated this app, and if only 5 to 10 have downloaded it, that might not be a legitimate score. It's very easy for a company to set up, 5 or 10 of its own employees and say, go give this a 5 on the store in order to try and boost this new product, which may or may not be good. So if you're on an Apple, this is the App Store icon. So this is the one that you want to look for if you want to install a new app on your iPhone. And so this is kind of what I was talking about a second ago, where if you look at the rating info arrow, you can see that there's 5 stars there. You can see that this app has, it's hard to see, but there's a 4.9 there. And right under that, it says 52K rating, which means 52,000 people have rated this app, and it has almost a 5. So that means that it's pretty safe. This, if you were interested in this, this would be a pretty safe game to download because there's more than enough ratings to trust its legitimacy. It has a good rating. You can also see there, like it was named, it has a little award for editor's choice. It's ranked 35 in the family group. So these are just things that can help inform your decisions when downloading apps and avoiding any kinds of scams or other bad things that you just don't need on your phone. And then again, like with the Android, you can see at the bottom, there's some operation icons down there to get between games and apps and things like that. So here I just want to touch on video conferencing. Now, obviously today we all managed to get in here through Zoom, and that's been great. And it's important to know, though, that especially in the current situation we're all living in, that a lot of things are being done through video conferencing. And as a result, it could involve installing a lot of apps to talk to everyone you need to talk to. Because just in this list here, we've got Apple FaceTime, Google Hangouts, we've got Zoom, which we're all on. There's Facebook Live, there's Cisco WebEx, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, BlueJeans. These are all apps that in the last 6 months I've had to use for one reason or another. Zoom has certainly been the most popular and common since the pandemic started, but if you're using them professionally, you may find yourself needing to use any number of these apps. And so it's important to know that there's a lot of them out there, and that's okay. It's okay to have all of these on your phone if you should need them to talk to different people who insist on using any one in particular. And it's also important to know that for a lot of us who don't necessarily want to go anywhere at the moment and don't want to go into a doctor's office, if we can absolutely help it, telehealth has expanded greatly in the last few months. Every doctor that I have went from zero telehealth capabilities to doing everything virtually for safety considerations. So what usually happens is that these healthcare professionals will have their own app. So beyond the list that I already have up there, there may be an additional app specific to whatever practice your doctor is a part of. And generally, they're not too hard to install compared to the others. But worst case scenario, you can almost always just call up the doctor's office and there'll be someone there who can help walk you through getting these telehealth applications set up on your phone. And again, as long as it's for, you know, basic checkups or even for things where you wouldn't necessarily need to be there in person, those are really great. And for a lot of us who've been working remote this year, a lot of these apps help people stay in touch, you know, and have meetings where you can still replicate some of the face-to-face elements, you know, certainly for things like brainstorming that you can't really do via email, but you could do via conference. And then the last one that has kind of surprised me the most has been virtual social gatherings. A lot of people have started doing virtual happy hours and things like that, where people just get together on one of these apps and they just sit and talk and they hang out the way that they would have, you know, at someone's home or in a bar or wherever it might be prior to the lockdown. So there's a lot of usage now for video conferencing that didn't exist even a year ago or only existed in a very limited capacity. So there's a lot of information out there to know on these things. But the good news is that every one of them that I've listed here, they all work, some better than others, but they all work and they all have generally not too many pitfalls that you can get tripped up in along the way. So, you know, it's good to know about those. So this is just a slide that I borrowed from a prior demonstration that I did. But if you don't know much about phone plans, this is just an example of a cheap smartphone. It's neither Android nor iPhone. This is a Jitterbug. And just some of the pros and cons, and just some of the things you want to consider about your plan. You know, this one is, you know, a very good price point, and it's very simple to use. As you can see from the layout here, it has, you know, bigger buttons and easier to read text, things like that. So there's always going to be pros and cons to any phone that you choose and any plan that you choose. So it's just, you know, it's just things to keep in mind. You know, like for example, one of the cons with this phone that can be frustrating is that it's very slow. And that's, you know, these phones are specific to this plan. So when you're choosing a plan, it's important to know what phones you will have available that, you know, that this plan will accept or that carrier is willing to provide for you. And I touched upon this briefly before, but how much data should any plan have? These are just the questions to consider if you don't really know how to make that decision. Do you make a lot of calls, very long calls? Do you want to send text messages? Not everyone likes text messages. You know, do you want to surf the web or do you want to watch a lot of online videos? Because if you want to watch online videos, if you want to use YouTube or any video streaming on your phone, you're going to want probably a higher data plan. Again, assuming that you're not able to do all of this on Wi-Fi. If you are going to be using the data, you can generally get a breakdown within your phone or from your telecom provider, and you can just get an idea of how much you've used, whether it's enough, whether it's not enough. But these are the important questions if that's a decision that you've yet to make, just to consider. And so that about does it for the first part of the presentation. So now, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, or you know, or anything you'd like me to clarify on things that I've already touched upon, this would be the time for that.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone who have a question, they can either ask or they can type it, that I can ask those. There was one question that Carol asked, how to set up the widget that when you were describing widget functionality, and
Right.
so
Okay.
that was a question.
Okay, so generally with a widget, the way that you go about installing those, now I'm going to describe, in my case, it's going to be on an Android because that's what I'm most familiar with. But the way that it works is you start off by, you go onto your home screen and you're going to look for any empty space, anywhere where there's not currently an app. And you're just going to hold your finger down there for a few seconds until a prompt comes up. And at that point, there should be something that says widgets. And then you're going to tap on that. And then in there, you're going to see a list of widgets that will be associated with a number of apps that you may already have on your phone. And from there, you just select the one that you're interested in, like if it, for example, if it's weather, and then you'll hit that.
Get in your room.
And it should allow you to just install that somewhere on your home screen. And
So the question is how? I've got the Apple 5 SE and I'm touching my screen at a blank place and nothing's happening, but I do have the weather channel on there as an app.
okay.
So I wanted to have that be on my, you know, when I first plug in, when I first sign in. How do I get that to be?
Right. Yeah, you'd want to have that displaying up there. Give me 1 second, because I can check very quickly on where to find widgets on an iPhone.
Okay.
So,
And the other question is when I go to my settings and I go to Wi-Fi, I'm at home where I have Wi-Fi, and yet it's showing me Verizon as where it's coming from, even though I've said, you know, to put it onto my Wi-Fi.
so sometimes your phone will connect to both the Wi-Fi and to the local tower, but it should be prioritizing exclusively the Wi-Fi connection once it's connected. So even if it says Verizon, if your Wi-Fi is connected, it shouldn't be using data. So, I mean, in terms of Wi-Fi, do you see that little Wi-Fi symbol at the top of your screen?
I do, and it says Verizon next to it, even though I have, you know, Optimum here at home.
That should be fine. That as long as that little Wi-Fi symbol is up there, that means that you're connected. So yeah, to add a widget to your iPhone, it says, let's see, tap the edit button at the bottom of the Today View screen and move widgets. So do you know how to get to the Today View screen?
No.
Okay, so I think this is probably something that I can follow up with you after the meeting if you'd like.
Okay.
Because I don't remember off the top of my head. I had an iPhone several years ago. I don't have one on me at the moment, but I can figure out how to do this and I can give you that information.
Okay, and this is a very old, this is a 5 SE, so it may not even have that capability.
So
It
Carol,
may not. I'm not sure. I'd have to check, but
Okay.
my email address is there on the screen. If you'd like to send me an email to follow up on this, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I'll double check to make sure that your iPhone is compatible with widgets, but I do believe that that should be an option for you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
another question, Andrew, is from Mona, how to change the background picture on iPhone 11. So when you mentioned you can personalize your screensaver, so she just want to know how do you do.
So generally, one of the easier ways to start off with selecting a background picture is to go into the photo gallery itself. If you know where the gallery is, you should be able to just highlight a picture, hold down your finger on a picture, and there should be a little icon that will give you the option. But I'm just looking here, it might be an easier way. So if you go to the settings on your iPhone,
You had to close out and go back in.
within settings, there will be a wallpaper option, and you can choose a new wallpaper. And then, so from in there, there'll be several options saying dynamic, stills, live, but you're probably going to want to go with choosing one of your own photos, assuming that's what you want to do. And then from there, you find the image that's in your gallery and you select that one, and that should set it as your wallpaper.
Good, very good. Anybody else has any question? If not, well, thank you very much for everyone to participating, and thank you to Andrew for doing such a great job. And we would try to have this presentation on the website. That Colette, do you want to say anything closing? I don't hear from her. Maybe she's muted. But anyway, thank you, everyone, and it's being very helpful. Bye-bye.
I was on mute.